My name is Sinead Hewson and I'm a final year PhD student from Technical University in Dublin. My research, called Communication at the Core, is focused on the link between the communication function and the creation and development of strategy in organisations. And I'm curious as to whether the position, territory and scope of the public relations function can influence decisions, tactics, and in turn, results. The theme of today's session is whom do we serve? And this is a question which came up again and again in the semi-structured interviews that I conducted with 34 senior people working in international organisations. The sample was a mix of people, about 50% of which had a responsibility for communication, and the other 50% were part of a leadership team or experts with the ability to influence or help make communication decisions. Before I go into the findings, I want to tell you a story. When I started out in my public relations career, I worked within the medical sector because I had originally studied nursing and understood scientific terms. And about 3 years in, I was in my second, maybe third role in an agency. I was asked to prepare a media pack and press release on a piece of research for a pharmaceutical company, which on first glance looked very promising. However, I had questions about the integrity of the research. The feedback from the client and also from my employer was A, I wasn't qualified enough to make that type of decision, and B, finance was far more important than the integrity of the data, which could be addressed at a later stage. This didn't sit well with me, so I stepped back from the project and ultimately left the organisation. And I have to say it was quite a difficult choice at that time. And when we look at how the environment we as communicators are operating in and how it's changed over the last number of years, the issue of transparency, discernment, and whom do we ultimately serve has come up again and again. And this is also reflected in the research findings. What's very interesting when you look at the views, bearing in mind that it's a multidisciplinary perspective with communicators and people with different backgrounds, is that there is a recognition that communication is moving from a process type of function towards an environment which is in perpetual flux with an organic, always-on transactional flow. And of course, this point has been highlighted by academics in previous papers over the years. However, as a consequence of this, our capabilities and the skills that we need to thrive in the profession are evolving. And instead of communicators just being well-organized people who can meet deadlines and pitch a story, we operate at a level of sense-making, identifying patterns and understanding interrelationships and what's taking place within an always-on, omnipresent, omnidirectional communications environment with multiple transactions. And what I found very interesting was that the pattern that came up again and again with the participants was a theme around doing the right thing profitably. They all highlighted the fact that end user needs are valued ahead and above those of the organization, and that this shift has been happening over the last 5 to 10 years. And it's more about doing the right thing and making a difference rather than purely being driven by shareholder value. While in the story I told you a moment ago, shareholder value and profit was the driving behavior underneath the work that we did. And this change in dynamic presents a very interesting opportunity for us as a profession, because the foundations on which we make our decisions and the counsel that we give suggests that we're moving towards co-creation and building of trust and trust-making capabilities that actually make a difference within organizations. And this is empowering because when we look at stakeholders and how they have matured over time, we see that the communicators of the future and the end users of the future have very different perspectives on what privacy is, on what transparency is, and what shareholder value is, and what value actually stands for. versus what a typical end user or company would have looked at maybe 10, 15, or 20 years ago, which was more orientated towards profit. And the research highlights that we are in fact the custodian of the stakeholder relationship. We act as the interface and we understand the consequences of the decisions that are made. We understand the risks and we also understand the dynamic within different groups. And that is a very powerful skill set to have as a communication profession, because as other interactions move towards automation and they become more transactional in nature rather than process driven, that insight around the human side of communication is one that will make that automation more relevant and more engaging going forward. The research also suggests that as end users, values are changing, and therefore definitions of success are changing away from profit and moving towards one which focuses on doing the right thing profitably. So for us as communicators, the foundation of our work, I would argue, is one around co-opetition. And co-opetition is where opposing forces come together to leverage an opportunity or to solve a common problem, versus cooperation, where mutually aligned groups mutually work together and are focused on building mutual relationships. Because when we look at co-opetition, we can have the organization with one viewpoint and we can have a stakeholder with an opposing viewpoint. And our role as communicator is to act as the custodian of this relationship with these types of stakeholders or more stakeholders and actually allow the transaction to flow. And as we leverage and curate this dynamic, therefore the discussion take place and the interaction and transaction and flow can take place. So today, when we look at this ongoing, omnipresent, omnidirectional flow of communication, it can be overwhelming to us as individuals, to our colleagues within teams, and also as a sector. And I would argue that doing the right thing profitably underpins the professional choices that we make. The research participants emphasized this point in the one-to-one interviews, because when we go back and reflect on doing the right thing profitably, then we are able to truly answer, whom do we serve? Is it the payer, as in the employer or the client? Is it the end user? Is it society itself? Or is it the responsibility of me, guided by my own moral compass? Thank you.